They make a list of other books that they want.
Okay. I was like, not pen, banning books.
What is the Schomburg Center? To me, it is home. The place where we come to see who we really are, not just somebody else's reflection of who we are.
The Schomburg Center is a place of culture, it's a place of history, it's a place of knowledge.
The Schomburg Center, to me, is a repository of all of the things that has documented our sense of worth as a people.
For me, that means that it is a place of immense power.
The Schomburg Center is a public research library and a cultural institution.
For the study of the Pan-African world.
It is perhaps the best in the world.
My Schomburg Center is Arturo Alfonso Schomburg.
Arturo Schomburg said, Black history and culture and intellect exists at a time when most people didn't believe that. He collected those evidences, and that became the beginning of the collection.
And it has expanded and has grown to where it is now a world-class institution.
It holds over 10 million items.
There's no parallel anywhere that brings to light what we as people of color have done, what we continue to do.
Black culture is all of culture. The universals that animate everyone's life happen here for all people.
The Schomburg for me is one of the center pillars of Harlem. When I started the journey of finding out about Red Rooster and Harlem, the very first place I went to was the Schomburg.
Researchers from around the world come and use what we have here.
I could not have written just about any of the books that I've written without the Schomburg Center's archives, resources.
The Schomburg Center is much more than a library. We encourage lifelong learning and exploration.
The Junior Scholars Program is a Saturday program with students from 5th grade to senior year in high school to help them learn about Black history and culture.
Learning about my history is important because it teaches me who I am.
The Schomburg Junior Scholars Program is going to do nothing but uplift them.
So many talented and brilliant people have walked the corridors of this amazing institution over the years. From Octavia Butler to Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, Ella Fitzgerald, Alvin Ailey, and Harry Belafonte, who graced the stage in this room of the American Negro Theater.
This place evokes great memories. It was a gift to us in our community to really try to find that space to reflect expressions of Black experience. I just knew that the environment and what I saw these young African Americans doing was a place I needed to be.
What is my Schomburg Center? I'm standing here at the Cosmogram, which underneath holds the ashes of the poet Langston Hughes. On the evening when this Cosmogram was dedicated, people began to empty out of the auditorium. A jazz trio struck up, and to my amazement, Amira Baraka went over and asked Maya Angelou for a dance. And they started to dance on top of the Cosmogram, on top of the ashes of Langston Hughes, and I felt what a fitting way to kiss the memory of Langston.
The Schomburg Center is a research institute and a library, but it's so much more than that.
There's something going on every day.
So many amazing people come here to talk about their creative craft, to share what inspires them. The Schomburg Center's collections help to tell stories even beyond our walls.
The Schomburg Center is here in this exhibition at MoMA, One-Way Ticket, Jacob Lawrence's Migration Series. We depend on the resources of the Schomburg to enable us to tell this story. Thinking about the implications of the past on the present is absolutely crucial for understanding the next steps, understanding what we have to do to go forward.
We today have the responsibility of making sure that new artists and activists, new scholars and poets know that this place continues to be a resource and a source of inspiration for the work that we must continue to do.
The Schomburg Center is knowledge.
The Schomburg Center, to me, is education.
The Schomburg Center is home, it is family, it is foundational.
The Schomburg Center is inspiration.
The Schomburg is with me in everything that I do.
Community, inside and out.
The Schomburg Center is us.
The Schomburg Center is you, and we invite each and every one of you to find your Schomburg Center.
It's 15 seconds long. There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Yay! Welcome to our 11th annual Black Comic Book Festival. This is our first year in person since the start of the pandemic, and it's such a pleasure to see such a beautiful turnout. Welcome to the Schomburg and welcome to Harlem, y'all. My name is Kadiatou Tubman. I am the Schomburg Center's Manager of Education Programs and Executive Producer of the Black Comic Book Festival. And again, it is my privilege to welcome you here. Over the course of nearly 100 years, the Schomburg Center's librarians, curators, educators, and other professionals and staff have worked tirelessly to provide a robust and free public access to our over 11 million items and documents of Black life and history. And it's really important that today's conversation exists because the Schomburg exists to tell stories, different stories, diverse stories that spread across the African diaspora. So it's important, and you'll hear from our panelists, very timely, but it's so great to have so many of you in the audience to participate. This festival is one of New York City's premier events that features Black and Latinx and people of color who are comic book creators, writers, merchandise sellers, all the gamut, and you'll be able to meet them in our exhibitor marketplace out there. For our folks joining online, we have live transcription for access, disability access, and also for those who are on YouTube, we encourage you to use the chat and really build community online. Lastly, for the folks in-house here at the Schomburg Center, some quick housekeeping. Our book signings will happen after each program near our Latimer Gallery. You can head out to the gift shop, buy some books, and get it signed by our authors. Some of them on the panel have actual booths in the exhibit marketplace, so you can see them there as well. When you are exiting for the program, we do ask that you use this exit to your left to exit the auditorium, all right? So now let's get started. I got all the nitty-gritty out of the way. Our program, Ban Books and Diversity, book bans across the US are targeting graphic novels, comic books, especially those that take up issues of race, gender, sexuality. This will be a conversation about how to advocate for stories that represent the full range of human experience, especially the Black experience. And so to introduce our panel, we have Kadiatou Tubman. Kadiatou Tubman is the Global Newsroom Managing Editor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Insider. Previously, she was a senior editor, national politics reporter at Yahoo News, and a Reuters Journalist Fellow at the University of Oxford. She is regularly featured as a guest panelist on MSNBC's American Voices. Katie is also an adjunct professor at Columbia Journalism School and Hunter College. Also, she's my twin. Gotta shout that out. That's the best part.
That's the best part.
So Katie is going to kick off and introduce our panelists. We have here Joe Illidge, Dr. Monique Couvson, Mike Haynes-Pitts, and Edgardo Miranda Rodriguez. Did I say that right? I tried my best. Hey! So please enjoy the conversation. They'll talk for a bit, and then they'll open it up for Q&A with the audience. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Kadiatou. And thank you all for being here. Yes, I got asked in the hallway if she did an outfit change just for this panel, and I was confused, and then I realized that not everyone knows she has a twin, and she doesn't talk about me. That's totally fine. Totally fine. I'm excited to be here with you all and to welcome this panel. We have Dr. Monique Couvson, who is an award-winning author and social justice scholar with 3 decades of experience in areas of education, civil rights, juvenile, and criminal justice. Dr. Couvson is the president and CEO of Grantmakers for Girls of Color, the nation's primary, only philanthropic intermediary explicitly focused on resourcing movements and organizations led by and in support of cis and trans girls and young femmes of color. Give her a hand. Yes. And we also have with us today Edgardo Miranda Rodriguez, is a graphic novelist, most notably recognized as a writer and creator of the critically acclaimed and best-selling superhero series La Boricua. Yes! As the creative director and owner of Somos Arte, a Brooklyn-based creative studios or services studio, he has worked with such notable clients as Atlantic Records, Sony Pictures, and Marvel. Edgardo is also known as the arts envoy for the U.S. State Department, giving talks and leading workshops in Latin America about how La Boricua speaks to social justice issues as a graphic novel. He has also written for Marvel Comics, critically acclaimed anthology, Guardians of the Galaxy, Tales of the Cosmos. Thank you so much for being here, Edgardo. Yeah. And beside him, we have Joseph Illidge, who started his career as an editor and advocate for diversity and inclusion at Milestone, the groundbreaking comic book publisher profiled by the HBO Max documentary, Milestone Generations. Joseph was the first editor of color on the Batman books for DC Comics, and the first Black executive editor at Heavy Metal magazine, recruiting an unprecedented variety of diverse creators for both franchises. Yes. And last but not least, we have Mike Haynes-Pitts. He is the author of the Afrofuturistic cyberpunk, I love this, LGBTQ plus book trilogy, the Surge series. The trilogy follows a variety of Black LGBTQ femmes on various journeys in Africa. He has enjoyed creating the characters that he wants to see in the media. When he's not writing or editing, he hosts the Black LGBTQ plus events in the city, produces videos, chats on his Brainy Blurred podcast, and plays video games and travels. Welcome all of you. Thank you for being here. And thank you all for being here in the audience, and for folks at home, thank you for being there as well. This could not be a more important time to be having this conversation, also to be here at the Schomburg. April is actually the National School Library Month, so we could celebrate school libraries. And this is so important because there are schools right now around the school libraries and libraries around the country right now fighting to stay open, fighting to not be defunded because they are putting banned books on the shelves. So to be here at the historic library that is the Schomburg is an important keystone of what we're talking about today. And so we're gonna get right into it. I'm gonna first kick off by saying Dr. Monique Couvson, I'm gonna call you Monique. Monique, one of your books is on the ban list. Yes, it is. There's a list of 300 books by PEN America that lists current books that are banned, and one of your books is on that list. My question was going to be for you. I know, right? My question was going to be for you. How did you first react when you found out? But you found out about 10 minutes ago when I told you and asked you. So, how did you react when you found out, and what does it feel like to be on a banned book list?
I suspected it was coming. And I feel it is a badge of honor to be on that list. You know, instantly I think of the books that get banned are those that are pushing, and those that are challenging us to think outside of what is normed to harm us. And so, you know, Push Out is about the criminalization of Black girls in schools. You're talking about race, gender, sexuality. I'm talking about all of it. I'm talking about that plus criminalization, plus. And so I think that they recognize that I am inviting a deep interrogation of some of these harmful conditions in our communities and the specific way that they impact Black girls and femmes. It means I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
And that's so true. That's exactly what Toni Morrison said when she found out one of her books was banned. She got a letter from a person in the Texas prison system, and they said, hey, did you know that one of your books, Paradise, was banned because they would incite a riot? And she's like, look at me. She's like, basically like, look at me starting some stuff up. There you go. That's exactly where I want to be. So that's exactly the response we expected. And I really want to start that question off by asking all of you, when did you first enter the conversation about banned books? Where was your touch point and your entry point, especially as writers and creators, and especially as folks who push forward books from diverse topics? Where was your entry point? I'll start with you, Edgardo.
My entry point, actually going back to the opening video that we saw, Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, my madrina, was one of the voices, and emphasized that we're in the Arturo Alfonso Schomburg Research Center and Library. I have a personal connection to Schomburg because he comes from Santurce, Barrio Obrero, which is where my family's from in Puerto Rico, a town that was founded by libertos, Puerto Ricans of African descent, of freed African descent. And my connection was a recent conversation I had with Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, Marta, because she and I, mostly uninitiated from her, feel that we're on the brink of a culture war. This is something very serious. This is not something that's just topical. This is not a hashtag. This is very real. Recently, Erykah Badu was on MSNBC, and she literally said, woke is code for Black. And people are using codified language to refer to people of color. We're living in an era right now where the power structures, which are mostly run by white men, are pumping propaganda and ideas to the masses. Let's go to some like old school hip hop math, the 85%, right? To force them into conflicts with us, right? We're putting out content that is critical of our role, our place, our reality here in the United States, and we need to brace ourselves. You know, oftentimes we live in this beautiful bubble of New York City. I had a conversation recently with someone from CBS News just this morning that the Latin, brown, Black community in New York City is so different from anywhere across the United States, to the extreme of like a lot of brown people using the N-word, which I don't agree with, right? To this Afro-Caribbean connection that we all have, right? From the Young Lords to the Black Panthers to the creation of hip hop. Black and brown have been together in this city for more than a century. So we have to brace ourselves. We're on the brink of a culture war. We have to be proactive. This conversation is important. My book isn't on a banned list yet, but I grew up in an era where I was reading comic books and my comics were confiscated from me, and now my books are being taught in public schools across the United States because of foundations like the Penn Faulkner Foundation, which buy our books and distribute them. My books are being taught throughout Puerto Rico because the University of Puerto Rico, through a grant from the Mellon Foundation, bought our books in an effort to reintroduce a dialogue and a discourse around our Afro-Latin heritage in Puerto Rico to defiantly address the colorism that exists within our own community. So it's a real conversation. We're in the midst of something that's incredibly important right now. We have to brace ourselves. She just found out 10 minutes ago. That's very real. I can find out 10 minutes from now. And what does that mean? Institutions like Schomburg, authors and creators like ourselves have to brace ourselves for what's next. Readers and supporters in this audience have to brace yourselves for what's next. They're literally taking our stories away, are attempting to, but they won't, because you cannot capture or enslave or imprison an imagination, you know? And I think that's why this conversation, I feel, is so important.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. Joseph. As someone who has written a book about what looks like a Black judge, you can talk about that a little bit. Right. As someone who's written about something that's inspired by Ketanji Brown, someone like that, who also had so much controversy around her appointment to the Supreme Court, you also have a touch point with this era of banned books. You have a touch point with knowing what it means to put out books that people might not want to see. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So really, and first of all, it's really heartwarming that all of you are here, because we really love to get together and talk about the fiction, but when it gets to real life, not so many people get together. So the fact that we're here talking about something that is real is really amazing. And my first experience really goes back to when I worked at Milestone. Milestone started in 1993, and one of the company's founding titles was called Blood Syndicate, and it was about a superpowered gang. And we had parents and parental organizations really having a problem with this book, writing letters to us, because back in the day, people would write you letters directly. There was no email, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook. And, you know, it's called Blood Syndicate, so I'm not sure if it's for your 7-year-old, right? Maybe your 7-year-old, but it was about a superpowered gang, right? Flash forward to now, I'm a member of the board of directors for the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. And so last year, one of the major things that was happening with the fund, and our executive director, Jeff Trexler, was really spearheading this, was defending Maya Kobabe, the author and creator of the genderqueer graphic novel, right? Which has become the tip of the spear of this whole crusade, which is now including Jerry Craft's school trip and the graphic novel adaptation of The Diary of Anne Frank. And so I don't know if you can find a day in America now where you don't read about a book ban. This morning, I open up the New York Times app, and what do I see? Llano County in Texas, right? They almost shut down their entire library system because there was a successful lawsuit that prevented 17 books from being removed. So they were just going to shut down all the libraries. And to Edgardo's point, I want you to think about what's happening now. They're not banning superhero stories. They're going for the jugular, which are the real life stories, or the stories that are close to real life. Why are they doing this? They're doing this because this is a criticism of the fallacy of American imperialism, right? Of the fallacy of whiteness as supremacy, right? And because we continue to win, and understand, when you are considered a threat, that's because you're winning. It's not because you're losing. We are continuing to make real life impact, and so they keep upping the ante, and the final version of that now is what I call the time machine process, where basically you want to eliminate history from books. You want to eliminate history from educational curriculums. So suddenly, the transatlantic slave trade, well, that didn't happen. That's a thing of fiction, right? I can prove it. It's not in the books. It's not in our libraries. So it didn't happen, right? So by eliminating these real touch points in history, they eliminate the eventual comeuppance of reparations. The government does not want to give reparations. It does not want to prepare the damages that it has done to all of the other people, all of the mutants in our society. So when they're going after queer people, when they're going after people of color, it's because they don't want the acknowledgement of the crimes, because they don't want to pay the reparations.
Thank you. And it's so important what you mentioned, Joseph, about the erasure of history or rewriting of history. I would love to talk about this with you, Mike, over there. I mean, you're a history educator, and we heard from Edgardo say, you know, New York is a bubble in a way, and folks need to realize that this could be harming us as well. But you also want to realize that outside of New York City, there are places and parents and communities that are trying to get books off of shelves too. So it's not that far removed from us. As an educator, what has been your touch point?
So the interesting thing is, so I've taught not just in New York, I've taught in Texas, I've taught in Atlanta, Georgia. So I've seen, I'm teaching now about 13 years, so I've seen the gamut of like education and how it differs across the country. And I'm from California, so seeing a wide range of America's education systems. And a lot of the books we discussed that are on that banned list, whether they're older books like To Kill a Mockingbird or more recent books, are all part of the discussion, especially as a teacher, right? Like these come into play frequently. And the nice advantage of New York, and especially someone who has also had the advantage of working primarily with Black and brown administration, I've been so lucky and fortunate that I've kind of had kind of a whole lot of leeway to teach how I want to teach. And I was a global history teacher. Currently, I teach government economics. So, you know, everything we talk about in government economics is very real. And the importance of, it's not even just talking about what happens in my scenarios, not just banned books, it's banned ideologies, right? Like, so much of what I talk about, I know how much I would have been banned frequently as a teacher. Like the amount of stuff I've taught, like even talk about Mansa Musa as technically being historically the wealthiest person alive would be considered false by so many people, right? But that's part of the history. I have to give you that. I have to give you every single aspect. I can't have a bias here. You need to see all the facets of life. And then currently with government, I have to show you the flaws with our government, right? Like you need to know these things because you're moving in the real world, you're going to colleges, you're about to experience things. And I have to prepare the students that I have who are predominantly Afro-Latino, predominantly West African, and a lot of Muslim students, that you are starting to encounter people who are not from your bubble anymore. And they are going to have judgments on you. They are going to judge you about all the books you've read, all the ideas you have, and shut that down. And I try and, especially for LGBTQ students, I'm considered a safe space for our school for that as a queer teacher. A lot of the LGBTQ students come out to me actually, and some of them feel brave enough to come out to their parents. And I'm like, hey, that's, if you want to, that is on you. I am supportive of you. But it's important that they themselves recognize that they would be banned in some scenarios as a person. And I know my books predominantly are LGBTQ Black femmes. Like, I had to remind myself I should probably make a male character at some point. But it's because of who has helped me so much in my life, who's inspired me, who's protected me so much, are Black LGBTQ femmes. And so a lot of the characters in my books are based on people I actually know. And so I know my book would be banned outright in tons of places because all the Black femmes, they love each other, very Sapphic love everywhere. And that wouldn't go well with cis hetero people that well. But I mean, I like what I write. I get to even get to share my book to some of the students who actually check things out. And they ask a lot of questions about their fears of the future and things that worry them every day about how well they'll be judged. And I do my best to encourage them to keep their voices heard and make sure that all their ideas are valid and that they matter. And I think that's the best we can do as an educator. But the cool thing is, having been teaching so long, some of my kids have kids, some of my students are teachers as well. So, you know, and I think the best inspirational story I have of just influence is there's someone who's a teacher, and she actually teaches white kids in Texas. And she gives them a lot of science ideologies, but she also gives them a lot of Black concepts with science as well. And one of the moms on the Facebook, this student now is in her late 20s, but she's a teacher. One of the moms, who's a white lady, said, she's like, oh, she's a fantastic teacher because she won Teacher of the Month. And she's like, she's a fantastic teacher. And I'm like, so in essence, that's always my goal. I'm hoping that I get to help you educate the world that you are going to have to live in. And whether that's telling people about banned books that you might not find, because she lives in Texas, Houston, Texas, where we all know is a hotbed of banning all kinds of stuff. So the fact that she is approaching white students with a Black ideology and influencing them where white parents actually find what she has to say matters, that's the goal here in a sense, right? Like that, this is change that can actually happen, and it may be small, but we try to make it happen in my classroom every day.
Right. Thank you.
I just wanted to add one really quick note that's important about Texas, and I'm sure you can back this up, that many people may not be aware of, is that Texas actually publishes most of the textbooks that are across the United States. That's very important to understand. So not only are we looking at a conversation around banned books, but as you mentioned, banned ideologies which will never even make it into actual textbooks that are published from Texas.
Oh, thank you for making that note. There was actually a textbook writer in Texas who had written a textbook, and he was asked to basically change a line in there about history around slavery. And they said, if you don't change the line, we won't publish these books. This is most of your money of where it's coming from. He refused to change the line. And so he lost the book deal and he couldn't publish the books. So it's important to point out that yes, Texas is a place where a lot of our students' textbooks come from. And also it's the same place that has now banned over 800 books, followed by Georgia and followed by Tennessee. So thank you for pointing that out. We know that comic books, graphic novels, and books like Push Out are going to be banned, are going to be continue to be banned, but this isn't the first time. Like we think back to the 1950s when there was a huge push to ban comic books because they were counterculture, they were exposing teens especially to a different world of thinking. And so a lot of the pushback came from a moral panic among parents and communities, and we know what that looks like. In terms of making sure that you're writing books that are representing communities, cultures, people that are marginalized, exploited, or even overlooked, ignored, or erased, is that your mission from the outset when you wrote these books, or when you put your mind to a page and put it out there to the public? Is it your mission to make sure you're disrupting culture? Or if it's not, then how do you defend it once it is seen as that?
Oh, for me, it's absolutely intentional. Charisma's Turn is actually my first graphic novel, and it is part of a series that explores what's happening with girls of color in schools. And the first book is Push Out. The second book is Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, Education for the Liberation of Black and Brown Girls. Then we did a documentary film. Then I did a book for teachers that is about cultivating joyful learning spaces for Black girls. And now I'm in conversation with girls directly with Charisma's Turn. And the intention is to say that for so much of how we understand this construct and all the things that have been described about what schools can be, I understand schools as a place that's either a structure of dominance, or it is a structure of dominance, and it's either going to reinforce the status quo of inequality, or it will be active in its disruption. And so what I tried to do with Charisma's Turn was create material that educators and adults who love our young people can engage with them directly, just to say, this is what can happen when we don't push out girls, right? This is what can happen if we believe that girls have gifts that we can engage. This is what can happen if we radically imagine what we understand to be the function of a learning space, and strip that to its core to become a location where healing can take place and where girls can be supported in their gifts rather than punished for their gifts. And for Black girls, that's really important, because a lot of what is embedded in the Black girl gift is her voice. It's her volume, it's her energy. And so much of her volume, her energy, her appearance, her way, her force, her energy, things that we celebrate in comic books and things that we celebrate in a fictional world are actually criminalized in the real world when it is manifesting in this body. And so Charisma's Turn is about reimagining what box braids can do, right? It is about reimagining how a girl can go from a fighter in school to being somebody who is a leader on environmental justice issues. Like, it is about challenging adults, but also challenging young people to understand that they are powerful and that they don't have to necessarily be a mutant per se to be engaged in this dialogue, but they can just be exactly who they are, and in their natural state have this power that can transform systems and understandings.
So you've been running a special ops this entire time?
The whole time.
It sounds like entire time. Edgardo, I know when you talk about, when I think a lot of us talk about La Boricua, I think that seemed intentional. Was it?
Yeah. I'm 52, so I started working on La Boricua when I was 45. So this was not me in a space of, I want to make comics. It was more, I have a background as an educator. I have a background as an activist. I've been mentored by professors, lawyers, activists my whole life. These are the mothers that raised me. I am also a Puerto Riqueño who is of an archipelago in the Caribbean island that is consisting of 3 million second-class U.S. citizens who are living under a colonial state. And I cannot detach my existence and my privilege as a U.S. citizen living in New York City to that of those living in Puerto Rico. So there was a lot of intention when I created La Borinqueña, because I wanted to address colonialism. I wanted to address the reality of people of color legally being treated as second-class citizens. It's one thing when we're people of color here in the United States and we have this concept, we're like, man, they're treating us like second-class citizens. Like Malcolm X literally said 60 years ago, just a few blocks from here when he spoke, right? But legally, under the United States government territorial description and ownership of Puerto Rico, there are 3 million second-class citizens there. So my books have always been committed to bringing that discourse into the comics, but not in a preachy way, through the character Marisol Rios de la Luz, an undergraduate student who's from the diaspora, meaning that she's from here, from Brooklyn, and she comes to Puerto Rico with her so-called first world privileges. And when she decides to live in Puerto Rico, she faces the reality of living in a colony. These are actual conversations I literally have with many of my friends. I refer to this movement happening in Puerto Rico right now of Nuevo Ricans, these Latins, Puerto Ricans who are moving to Puerto Rico in their 20s and 30s, and they're living with the reality. I'm looking at my friend right now in the front row. We know of many of our friends who live in Puerto Rico now and are living with this reality of, whoa, I'm living in a colony now. I don't have the same luxuries that I had living here in the United States, living here in New York City. So that intention went directly into the pages, into the panels, into the character development of these characters. But I also took it a step further because my character is literally named after Borinquen, the original name of the island, land of the noble creator. The name of the national anthem, La Borinqueña, which literally would translate to the Puerto Rican woman. And I see it as almost like my licensing fee, the work that I do in philanthropy when I dedicate a lot of our sales to our charity work in Puerto Rico, having raised close to $200,000 already over the last 7 years, awarding micro grants to grassroots organizations. There's deliberate intention in that work. We support organizations that preserve Afro-Puerto Rican heritage, that work with women's health and reproductive rights, work with children in providing media literacy and literacy, work with farmers, because even in Puerto Rico, believe it or not, the bananas that you're eating are grown in Costa Rica, not in Puerto Rico. You know, so there's a lot of deliberate intention in my work, and it is in the guise of superhero storytelling, because there's a colorful costume, just like Litzy. Litzy, where you at? You know, she's literally dressed up as La Borinqueña in her own costume, and that's the guise of this conversation. And a young woman like Litzy, who's an undergraduate student here in CUNY, finds connection to this character, right? And even showed me a picture of La Borinqueña that's in the CUNY library. So there's definitely a lot of deliberate intention in the writing and in the creating of this universe that I have.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to point out that at the start of the pandemic, when schools were closing down, I believe it was a class of fourth grade girls who were given a copy of your book, or the coloring book version of it. And the teacher exclaimed that she could hear the cheers from down the hall, that they finally saw a character that looked like them and that they could resonate with, even at a time that was so hard for a lot of students. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for being intentional. When it comes to you, Joseph, thinking about you writing the first book about having the first book of a Black girl judge out there in the world, that seems very on the nose and intentional to me. I'm guessing it was, right?
Yeah, no, listen. When you talk about intent, I don't think a mission is optional anymore, right? I mean, everyone on this panel disrupted society when we came out of our mother's wombs, right? That's just a fact. We were born disruptors. I mean, for me, it was when I interned at Milestone and I saw a business like that run by 4 Black men and a diverse staff, and I saw a reality in which Blackness was not monolithic, in which all cultures were represented equally, and in which we were the heroes and not the sidekicks and not the minstrels and not the coons. And I mean, I was a kid of the 70s and a teenager of the 80s. It was not a good time to be a black geek. I was a pariah. Milestone validated my existence, right? So now, 30 years later, so when my co-writers, Sean Martinborough and Milo Stone, and the artist Christopher Jordan and I did a 2-book series called Judge Kim and the Kids Court about a black girl judge, that was because we understood that the true superheroes of society are the lawyers and the judges and the doctors and the firemen. It's the civic agents of our time. And for black girls especially, you know, to go to Monique's point, the sabotaging of the growth of black women starts at the educational level. It starts at the earliest possible instance. And so it was important to show a black girl learning from her mother, who's a judge, about right and wrong. And it was important to show a girl with a journey, but what was really crucial was the idea of empathy. Empathy is a character trait that has been vilified in our society. Because when you look at the powerful people, they tend to be narcissists. They don't tend to have empathy. And the thing about empathy is very dangerous, because if you learn to care about someone else when you're a kid, you're gonna grow up and become a person who cares about the perspective of other people. And such a person will not be interested in banning books. Such a person will not be interested in racism and prejudice. Such a person will not sell their brother or sister out to make a buck. And what you're going to be talking about is an eventual transformation of society into a bunch of civic agents. And so that's why it was crucial to show empathy for kids, to show kids from diverse backgrounds, and to show peaceful conflict resolution. There's a problem, let's take it to court, right? And there's gonna be a system in which we're gonna hear the different sides, and we're gonna find out what truth is, we're gonna find out what fact is, but nobody had to hit anybody, nobody had to shoot or stab or kill anybody. Peaceful conflict resolution is at the core of a better society, right?
And it's, to that point, it's my hope that the more you're teaching empathy and showing that in your work, that the folks that are in those systems, because those systems can be broken in many ways, that the folks going to those systems will have more empathy and more justice leaning, as you just pointed out. In terms of you, Mike, I read one of the reviews under your book, Surge series, and it said, a future that includes black people, queer people, and more, and doesn't feel exploitative is always a good read. So, I mean, starting out, it seems like, yes, as we just heard, it seems like we all are born with a mission and there's no point in questioning anymore, and we were born disruptors. It felt like this series was disrupting. Was that your onset?
Definitely. For me, as a queer person, I was like, this is who I want to see, this is who I like in the world. And it's really interesting, we talk about black women, and that is like the guiding star. I mean, if you look at the covers of my books, there are predominantly black women on each of the covers, and they are very powerful women, but what I did over time was also have them grow as people, as eventually, like, sometimes, I mean, we're living in a rough cyberpunk future in my book, so it's like, it's not a peaceful place, like, honestly, but what happens with a lot of the characters is they eventually do come to conflict resolution. Some of them actually have to get aggression out, but then some of them come to peaceful moments and they have redemption, and they actually have a lot of empathy that goes within each other. And you get some interesting team-ups that might not have occurred in the earlier parts of the book series. So I think that's an important thing too. I was like, let me show you as much as I can as a masculine presenting queer person, best that I can for black femme woman, for what I know from them, and a lot of facets of that. And it's always intentional as that influence goes into what I do with work. I mean, I myself, as a disruptive person and being intentional. I've had my opinions on police prevent me from getting an administrative job. I've had it when I was a history teacher and they switched me back to math because of the influences I was doing for Black and brown kids. So it's really tough being an educator and having intent with wanting to be disruptive. And that's still like, it doesn't matter to me in a sense. It's like, I have to give you the reality of the world you're in and the reality that you're facing. So that's just really important to me overall. And my books are definitely intentional on that. And I think the coolest thing that happened is the first sale I had today was a young Black girl actually who came up and we got really excited. She thought the girls looked really cool on the book. And for me, I was like, okay, like she feels inspired by these characters. And that's always my intention. I want to see my students, Black femmes, Black LGBTQ people feel comfortable enough to be like, hey, your stories matter. You're not a caricature. And I don't care if that's being banned or being disruptive. That's the world we live in.
And one more question before we open it up for Q&A. You all talked about and touched upon that this is real life ramification. This is actually touching into real life. That when we talk about banning books, we're not just banning actual physical books, we're banning people, we're banning ideologies, we're banning a whole sort of world that we could be building into. And to lay it out very clearly, the American Library Association said about these book bans that this is the most unprecedented time and the most unprecedented volume of challenges they've ever seen, not just the books, but books that are about and by people of color and books that tackle topics like racism, sexual and gender identity. Specifically, this is the most unprecedented time. And so to ask you all, before we open up for Q&A, the question is right now, what do you think it will take to no longer ban these kind of books? What kind of world would that look like? Ooh, I'm gonna start on the end and work my way back. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's like, I think it looks like the world I created, right? Like for my books, where Africa is the prominent continent because there was a cataclysmic event where everyone from I do a reverse diaspora in my books. So we have Haitians, Dominicans coming back to Africa, African Americans coming back to Africa because it ends up being the safest haven in the world. And the LGBTQ element of my books is not what people bring up, right? If there's an issue with each other, there is a class level issue. There's an issue with the people who have powers. There's an issue with people with different gangs fighting. It is not about, are you a Black person? Are you a brown person? Are you LGBTQ? That is not a thing in the book. It's a future where we are so past that, we have other issues. Like, you are a person, cool, respect you completely. So for me, that's the point we have to get to. Now, if I don't know if that's I think my books take place in like 2,300 something. I mean, I don't know if anyone I know will ever see that, unfortunately, but we have to keep fighting as much as we can. Like, that's the best we can do so that eventually we get to that place.
Yeah, it's possible. It could happen in one generation. It might take two, and part of the thing is that we're hardwired as a society to instant gratification, right? And civic responsibility and activism and fighting to change legislation, that takes decades, right? It's not, I went to a protest, problem solved, I read the news tomorrow. What, things are the same? But I protested yesterday. There were 1,000 of us there. It doesn't work like that. Change will take decades. If you're going to get into the fight, you're going to have to be in it for the long haul. And I mean, Edgardo has spent most of his life fighting this fight. And so the stories that we're putting out and the embedded nature of those stories in the educational system, in libraries, and thank you to the librarians that are fighting against banned books. By the way, a number of them have lost their jobs. A number of them have been arrested, and they're still fighting. So having these things in the educational system will hopefully give them the kind of sustention and impact that the people who grow from those will take steps in their community, will take steps to affect change, will take steps to become politicians. So it's just going to be a long fight. This is not ending next year. This is not ending in 5 years, and I don't think we're gonna see it in the end of the lives of any adults here, but for any children here, by the end of their lifetime, they may see it.
Yeah, thank you. This is definitely a generational movement. As people of color, people of African descent, this is a generational movement. We have to remember that, at least in Puerto Rico, right, this was the 150th anniversary of the abolition of slavery, right? That's a couple of generations right there. The Civil Rights, Voting Rights Act was 1965, right? But many people forget that it was in 1975 when Latinos and Asian Americans actually got the right to vote. It was 10 years after that. So that means that less than 50 years ago, I had the right to vote. Pura Belpre, who's recognized by the American Library Association by having an award named after her, would be fired today. An Afro-Latina, Afro-Boricua, who introduced bilingual books into the public library system, who introduced Spanish books into the monolithic English-only library system. This is a movement that I will bring back to my opening comment, that is something that we have to participate in proactively. We can't be spectators. We have to actually be actively involved in it. Like Joe said, this is not a protest today, problem resolved. This is a generational movement. Our country is moving incredibly slowly, right? And there are always going to be movements that will press against this. But we have to recognize that the boomers are going to die soon. and my generation, Gen X, will be coming up. But it's my generation that we literally was like pushed aside by the boomer generation, because the boomer generation is caught up in this kind of like, you might be familiar with this phrase, founder syndrome, where many institutions are literally run by our generation before us, and they never gave us an opportunity. That's why those of us up here created our own opportunities, because stuff that existed, that pre-existed before us, never opened doors for us. And there's this phrase that when one door opens, one door closes, another door opens. I'm of the belief that when one door closes, you grab your tools, some lumber, and you make your own damn door, you know?
I see our greatest opportunity in the very characters that we have just been talking about. We talk a lot about Black girls. We engage a lot with Black girls. We center Black girls. We talk about the diversity and dynamicism of Black girls. But we often don't put our money where our mouth is. And so what is, I think, our opportunity now is to think about actualizing what we do a lot of at Grantmakers for Girls of Color, where we do run we run the Black Girl Freedom Fund, and that's in partnership with the 1 Billion for Black Girls campaign. In a free world, we don't ban books. We talk about freedom, we don't practice freedom. We talk about liberated futures, we don't invest in liberated futures. I think what we do is, and this is an invitation for everybody to come to the 1 Billion for Black Girls campaign and be a part of this conversation with us, but it is also really thinking about when we move our resources, when we support Black and Brown and Asian and Indigenous girls, femmes, and gender expansive youth, what we are doing is investing in those very people whose existence has been marginalized by these structures of oppression. And so if we are looking for a free society, we have to move our resources toward those populations that will produce that free society. And so it's a call to, is really a call to be a part of an existing movement of folks who have been moving these resources, been thinking critically about these things, and mobilizing with young people who are doing more than just, I think, articulating their vision for the future, but they're in an active practice right now that just needs our engagement and our ability to stand with them and our money to support their movements forward. So, I agree with you that, the possibility of a radical imagination exists in youth. And so let's invest in young people so we can, move past some of these horrible conditions that are unfortunately reproduced by those of us who've been educated by the generations before us.
I think we have time for one audience question. If there's a burning, I'm so sorry.
Or maybe like a bunch of yes or no questions.
Hey! But if there's anyone with a burning question, yes, I don't know if we have a mic in the audience. Hey, thank you.
Well, so, I mean, in terms of like not hearing about us, I mean, like that, blame it on the algorithm, right? Because if we don't pay for our blue check, you know what I mean? And we don't pay for ads, you're not gonna see us. You know, I can have 30,000 followers on Instagram, but only a few hundred likes because only a few hundred people are actually seeing my posts. But it's a credit to Kadiatou Tubman, who actually curates and produces this event, because this event, and similar to the Puerto Rico Comic Con, which I just came from literally yesterday, are possibly two of the only events for U.S. citizens, because Puerto Rico's part of this conversation too, right? That curate events around our culture, our stories, and our creative intellectual properties, right? The algorithms are literally created so that the mega billion-dollar corporations can constantly feed you content. So you can wear their t-shirts, you can buy their books, you can buy manga from across the planet, as opposed to buying our books that are literally outside this door. Right? So that's what's powerful about this event. This is not an event for the billion-dollar corporation to set up a booth. This is an event for the independent thinker, the disruptor, to set up a table so that they can actually give to you their intellectual property. These are original projects, you know, and our books, our projects, although they're independent, these books are still found in classrooms across the United States. My book is a part of the permanent collection of the Smithsonian National American History Museum, but you wouldn't know that unless I actually told you that right now. You wouldn't know that a textbook publisher based out of Paris, France, Atier, actually published a textbook where a whole chapter about Puerto Rico features a conversation about La Borinqueña, but you wouldn't know that until I actually told you that right now. So for educators like yourself, you legitimately and actually have to go outside of your incredibly comfortable zone to find us, because you're gonna constantly be fed content from the Disneys and the Warner Brothers, because that's where they're investing billions of dollars so that you continue to buy their content, subscribe to their content, wear their t-shirts, even tattoo yourself with their intellectual properties. But it takes a lot of work to march in the streets demanding social justice, to lobby to get legislation, to bring our books into libraries, but it doesn't take that much work to walk out the door and engage with these creators that are right here because of this event that Kadiatou Tubman and the rest of the staff here at the Schomburg Library have put together for the last 11 years.
I'll just say, because my story is a slightly different story given how I've come into this world, but I'm actually really proud to be the author of the first graphic novel coming out of the New Press. And so I'm really excited by the invitation for us to understand all the different ways that I shared with you that I've been having this conversation with folks about this issue, and to really think about this as an invitation for, especially as educators, for us to expand our own understanding of how we know what we know and where we get our information and how we move that information into the minds of young people. And so thinking about the multiple ways of knowing and thinking about art as a critical modality around the acquisition of knowledge, but also as a healing modality, is a real invitation for educators to think about taking on some of this other content that is rigorous content and also fun and also cultural and also all the things that make us feel like this is reflective of who we are because it's written by us. To take it, wrestle with it, and share it.
Thank you. And thank you so much for that question. That is time. As Joseph said, thank you for being in this for the long haul. You have been in it and you're doing the work. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. And thank you for the entire Schomburg Center for putting this entire event on. All right, that's it.
Yes, thank you, Kadiatou. That was amazing. Bigger round of applause. They deserve it. So inspiring. Thank you all so much. And thank you all for being here. We're going to ask you all to exit. We have another program in an hour that you all are welcome to come to. It'll be the Creator Symposium. It's a panel hosted by Women in Comics Collective International, and we'll explore the ways in which creatives working in comics can continue to grow and thrive in an ever-changing society. So we'll see you back in an hour. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah, that was amazing. You bodied it.